The Chosen Season 6 Episode 1 is finally here. And from the very first moment it grabs you by the heart and refuses to let go. Season 6 is unlike anything The Chosen has ever done before. And Episode 1 wastes no time proving that point. The entire season is locked into one single day. And the premiere makes it clear that this day is going to shake every character to their core. It begins under the cover of night. The same kind of darkness that cloaked the betrayal in the Gospels. And from the opening sequence, you feel the weight of what's coming. The atmosphere is suffocating, but intentionally so. It mirrors the tension of that final night, when the disciples were trying to make sense of what was happening, while Jesus himself remained calm, almost eerily steady, knowing the fate that awaited him. Dallas Jenkins said that this season would carry an energy unlike anything before it. And you can already tell in this episode that he meant it. The entire cast filmed overnight to capture that haunting atmosphere, and it seeps into every frame of the story. Now, what makes Episode 1 hit so hard is that it doesn't rely on spectacle. It relies on the weight of truth. You're not watching a dramatization that feels distant or detached. You're being pulled directly into the chaos of those final hours. From the moment Jesus is taken from the Garden of Gethsemane, there's no break, no pause, no time to breathe. The apostles scramble, torn between fear and loyalty, but Jesus himself does not resist. He doesn't argue. He doesn't try to escape. Instead, he embodies complete surrender because he knows this is not a loss. It's the fulfillment of everything he came to do. That silence from him, that refusal to defend himself, becomes louder than any words could be. And Episode 1 leans into that silence in a way that makes your chest tighten. The first trial begins almost immediately, and the pacing of it feels relentless. Jesus is dragged before Annas, a man who doesn't even officially hold the position of high priest anymore, but still wields influence. Here, the questioning starts. Annas demands answers, looking for some hidden agenda. But Jesus responds with honesty that sounds almost defiant in its simplicity. He points out that he has never hidden his teachings, that everything he spoke was done openly, in front of the people. There's no conspiracy, no secret, no hidden rebellion. And yet in that moment, as if truth itself was too much for them to bear, one of the guards lashes out and strikes him. That moment is brutal, not just because of the violence, but because of the injustice. You can feel the sting of humiliation layered on top of the physical pain. And what strikes hardest is the restraint. He could have answered back, he could have stopped it. But he doesn't, he chooses to endure it silently. From there, the pressure builds as Jesus is moved to Caiaphas, the high priest who convenes the Sanhedrin, the ruling council. This gathering is chaotic, desperate, and ugly. They bring in witnesses to accuse him, but the testimonies collapse under their own weight. Lies contradict lies. Nothing holds together. The room is filled with shouting, confusion, anger, and still, Jesus stands silent. It's almost unbearable to watch because silence in the face of lies feels like surrender, but here, it becomes something else. It becomes power. Finally, Caiaphas demands the ultimate answer: are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And this is the moment that shifts everything. Jesus responds with words that cannot be ignored. He declares that they will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, and coming with the clouds of heaven. Those words crash through the room like thunder. To his accusers, it's blasphemy. To us watching, it's the ultimate truth. The reaction is instant. Caiaphas tears his robes in rage, the council erupts, and the sentence is sealed: death. But even here, the irony cuts deep. They pronounce judgment, yet they have no power to execute it. They cannot end his life without Rome. And so the next stage begins, delivering Jesus into the hands of Pontius Pilate. The episode makes this transfer feel like the shifting of a storm. The religious authority handing him off to political power. The false holy rage now fueling the cold machinery of Rome. And here is where the weight of Episode 1 settles hardest. Pilate doesn't see a criminal. He doesn't see a threat. He sees a man accused without cause. Over and over, he looks for a reason to condemn Jesus, but he cannot find one. He even says aloud, "I find no fault in him," and yet the crowd outside grows louder, manipulated by leaders who demand blood. Pilate doesn't want to crucify him, but he doesn't want to face revolt either. His weakness becomes the weapon that seals Jesus' fate. Episode 1 is not just a retelling of ancient events. It's an unraveling of human nature itself. Betrayal, fear, silence, lies, and cowardice all weave together into a night that feels endless. And yet, the center of it all remains calm, unbroken, resolute. Jesus doesn't flinch. He doesn't bargain. He doesn't try to save himself. He walks forward into the storm, carrying the weight of every soul. And that is what makes this first episode unforgettable. As Episode 1 pushes deeper into the night, the tension around Pilate's judgment grows heavier by the second. What makes this part of the story so chilling is not just the pressure of the crowd. But the way power crumbles when it's faced with truth. Pilate is no fool. He can see what's really happening. He knows this trial is built on envy, lies, and manipulation. He knows the leaders are pushing for blood because Jesus threatens their control, not because he's guilty of some crime. And yet, Pilate is trapped in a position where justice and politics collide. To release Jesus would mean defying the leaders and the mob they've stirred up. To condemn him would mean executing a man he knows is innocent. It's the kind of moral crisis that reveals the weakness of his character. Pilate wants to stay neutral, but neutrality is not an option here. At first, Pilate looks for an escape. He sends Jesus to Herod Antipas, hoping to shift the responsibility. Herod, the ruler of Galilee, is more interested in spectacle than truth. He's heard stories about Jesus performing miracles, healing the sick, feeding thousands. And so, when Jesus is brought before him, Herod waits with an almost childlike curiosity, expecting a performance. But Jesus gives him nothing. Not a word. Not a miracle, nothing. His silence frustrates Herod, who was hoping for entertainment, not confrontation with truth. The soldiers mock him, dressing him in a robe like a pretend king, laughing at the man who refuses to play their game. And then they send him back to Pilate, leaving the Roman governor with the decision he was trying so hard to avoid. What follows is one of the most devastating turns in history. Pilate knows Jesus is innocent. He says it multiple times. He tries to release him, offering the crowd a choice between Jesus and Barabbas, a criminal known for violence. It should have been an easy choice. One man who healed, loved, and spoke peace, the other guilty of rebellion and murder. And yet the crowd, stirred by anger and fear, shouts for Barabbas. The voices rise, louder and louder, demanding the release of the guilty and the death of the innocent. And here is where Pilate's weakness fully shows. He listens not to truth, not to justice, but to the roar of the crowd. He caves under the pressure, but before he hands Jesus over, Pilate takes one final cruel step. He orders Jesus to be flogged. And this isn't some mild punishment meant to satisfy the mob. This is brutality designed to break a man down before execution. Roman flogging was infamous, tearing flesh, leaving muscle and bone exposed. It wasn't just meant to punish, it was meant to humiliate, to strip away dignity, to show that Rome held absolute power over the human body. And yet, even here, Jesus doesn't cry out. The pain is unimaginable, but his silence is louder than the soldiers' laughter. Then comes the mockery. The soldiers twist thorns into a crown and press it into his head. They drape a purple robe over him, bowing in false worship. "Hail, King of the Jews!" they shout, striking him again and again. The humiliation is relentless, but it's more than mockery, it's prophecy. Without even realizing it, they're crowning him. They're declaring his kingship, even as they spit in his face. What they mean as insult becomes truth. Pilate brings him back out, bloodied, bruised, and broken, hoping the sight of his suffering will satisfy the crowd. "Behold the man," he says, as if the image of a beaten Jesus would calm their rage. But it doesn't. Instead, it fuels it. The crowd demands more. "Crucify him," they shout again and again until it becomes a chant that drowns everything else out. Pilate pleads with them, still insisting he finds no fault in him. But the mob won't stop. And so, in an act that has echoed through history, Pilate washes his hands in front of them all, claiming innocence while delivering the greatest injustice the world has ever seen. That moment of Pilate washing his hands is one of the most haunting in Episode 1. It shows us that sometimes the worst evil doesn't come from those screaming for blood, but from those who know the truth and choose cowardice instead. Pilate tries to stand aside, but in doing so, he becomes part of the crime. His hands are not clean, they are stained forever by the decision to hand Jesus over. From here, the story takes on a darker, heavier rhythm. The sentence is passed. The road to crucifixion begins. The disciples, scattered and broken, watch from the shadows, unable to stop what's unfolding. Each one of them feels the weight of failure, of helplessness, of fear. Peter, who once swore he would never deny Jesus, now wrestles with the shame of his denial echoing in his heart. The others are silent, unsure if they'll be the next to be dragged away. And through it all, Jesus continues forward without resistance, without anger, without bitterness. His silence isn't weakness, it's purpose. He is walking the path that was written long before that night began. By the time episode 1 closes, you're left breathless. Not because of spectacle, but because of the crushing weight of inevitability. The betrayal is done. The trial is over. The verdict has been delivered. And yet, even as darkness seems to have won, you know deep down this isn't the end. This is the beginning of the greatest act of love the world has ever seen. Episode 1 does not let the weight of what's happening ease up for even a moment. Once Pilate gives the order, Jesus is officially condemned to die, and the transition from trial to execution begins. This is the moment where the power of Rome steps into full view. Soldiers march with authority. The crowd surges with noise and the atmosphere feels suffocating. Yet in the middle of it all, Jesus doesn't resist. He doesn't fight. He accepts every step because he knows this road is not defeat. It's destiny. That's what makes this part of the episode so crushing and so powerful at the same time. You're watching injustice unfold, but you also feel the sense that something far greater is at work. Something no human hand can stop. The sentencing is followed by one of the most brutal traditions of Roman execution: the scourging in preparation for crucifixion. Episode 1 shows the harshness of this punishment not to glorify violence, but to confront us with the reality of what Jesus endured. Roman soldiers were known for their cruelty, for turning pain into a performance. And here they push it to the limit. They place the heavy wooden crossbeam onto his shoulders, the weight pressing into already torn flesh. Every step forward is agony, yet he doesn't collapse into rage or demand justice. He carries it in silence. And that silence speaks volumes. The crowd becomes a character of its own in this episode. They are restless, divided, loud, unpredictable. Some scream for his death with wild hatred, others look on in stunned silence, unable to process what they're witnessing. The noise of the mob surrounds everything like a storm. And isn't that the heartbreaking part? It wasn't just leaders or soldiers who condemned him. It was the voices of ordinary people swept up in fear and anger. That detail makes the episode hit differently, because it shows us that this wasn't some faraway injustice. It's a mirror of how easily humans can be swayed to abandon truth when it's inconvenient. The disciples at this point are broken, scattered into the shadows. Peter's denial still burns in his chest. Every time the rooster's crow echoes in his memory, it cuts him deeper. He had sworn loyalty, sworn he'd die beside Jesus, but fear won. Now, he watches from a distance, ashamed, desperate, unable to fix what's been done. The others are silent, some hiding, some too terrified to be seen. Episode 1 gives weight to their absence. It shows that while Jesus is surrounded by noise, he is also deeply alone. The ones who loved him most are nowhere to be found. And that loneliness is part of the burden he carries. One of the most striking contrasts in this part of the story is between Jesus' calm strength and the chaos around him. Pilate is shaken, torn between politics and justice. The priests rage with anger, desperate to protect their power. The crowd screams louder and louder, swept up in hysteria. But Jesus? He stands firm. His silence cuts through the noise. He doesn't argue. He doesn't beg. He doesn't curse his accusers. He simply endures, step by step, carrying the weight of something far bigger than the moment. And that is what makes this episode so haunting. It's not about what he says. It's about what he doesn't say. Even in his silence, there are moments where truth bursts through. Pilate, still searching for a way out, asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus responds simply, "You say that I am." It's not a denial, it's not an explanation. It's a quiet affirmation that leaves Pilate unsettled. That answer carries an authority beyond politics, beyond law, beyond fear. It's as if Jesus is saying, "Your words are yours, but the truth is unshakable." That moment lingers because it shows us that even in the face of judgment, Jesus isn't the one on trial. The ones questioning him are the ones being exposed. The episode doesn't just show us events. It makes us sit in the weight of them. The flogging, the mockery, the robe, the crown of thorns. Each act of cruelty is layered with irony. They mock him as a king, but in doing so they reveal the truth. They robe him in purple to humiliate him, but that robe declares his royalty. They crown him with thorns to wound him, but it becomes a crown that symbolizes sacrifice. It's as if every insult is turned upside down. Every act of cruelty twisted into confirmation of who he really is. That irony is chilling, and episode 1 lets you feel it fully. And then there's the moment where Pilate finally gives in completely. The chants of the crowd rise, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" The sound is deafening, relentless, like waves crashing against a rock. Pilate steps before them, washing his hands, declaring that he is innocent of this man's blood. But we know the truth. No amount of water could wash away the stain of that choice. The scene leaves you hollow because it's not just a historical detail. It's a picture of humanity's failure, of how justice collapses when fear wins. By the end of this section of episode 1, the path is set. Jesus has been handed over, the soldiers have their orders, and the weight of the cross lies ahead. But instead of feeling like a story closing, it feels like something opening. The opening of the greatest act of love and sacrifice in human history. The darkness is heavy, but you can almost sense that light is waiting just beyond it. That's what makes this first episode so overwhelming. It doesn't just tell us what happened. It pulls us into the heart of why it happened. As the episode continues, the focus shifts even more toward the weight of the crucifixion looming ahead. At this stage, the events aren't just about political maneuvering or religious accusations anymore. They've crossed into something far heavier. A cosmic moment where heaven and earth seem to hold their breath. Jesus has been condemned, and now every step forward feels like a march toward destiny. The soldiers prepare, the crowd gathers, and the disciples remain broken, scattered in fear. But through all of this, Jesus remains steady, silent, and unshaken. That calm in the middle of such chaos is what gives episode 1 its haunting power. The Sanhedrin, having gotten what they wanted, disappear into the shadows with their victory. They believe they've silenced a threat, that their authority is safe again. But the irony is, in trying to protect their power, they've ignited something far beyond their control. That's the underlying theme that pulses through this episode. Every attempt to break Jesus only magnifies who he really is. Caiaphas tore his robes and cried blasphemy. Yet those very words of Jesus about sitting at the right hand of power will soon be proven true. Pilate tried to wash his hands clean. Yet history remembers him as the man who handed the innocent over. And the soldiers mocked him as king of the Jews. But their mockery became the eternal truth of his identity. Episode 1 doesn't just retell these details, it lets the weight of irony sit heavy on your chest. One of the most devastating aspects of this section is the silence of the disciples. Imagine walking with someone for years, witnessing miracles, hearing him call you by name. And then on the night he needs you most, you vanish. That's what episode 1 presses into. Peter, broken by his denial, can't even bear to be seen. John lingers in the distance, torn between love and fear. The others are scattered, unsure whether stepping forward means sharing the same fate. That silence cuts deep because it reminds us of something painfully human when fear takes hold. Even the strongest vows collapse. Watching Jesus walk forward alone, abandoned by nearly everyone, amplifies the sorrow of this moment. It isn't just physical suffering. It's the heartbreak of being left behind by those you love, yet even in abandonment, there are glimpses of presence. Mary, his mother, and Mary Magdalene appear like silent witnesses to the storm. They cannot stop what's happening, but their presence shows love that doesn't run, even when it can't rescue. Their heartbreak becomes part of the atmosphere. The quiet pain of watching someone you love be humiliated, beaten, and condemned. Episode 1 doesn't sensationalize it. It lets the stillness of their grief speak louder than any words could. Elizabeth Tabish, who plays Mary Magdalene, described filming those moments as unbearable. Because even as an actor, watching the suffering of someone you love tears at your soul. That's exactly how the episode makes you feel. The soldiers, meanwhile, treat the entire process like routine. To them, it's just another crucifixion, another display of Rome's power. They laugh, they mock, they gamble over scraps of dignity, completely blind to the weight of the moment. That blindness is one of the cruelest details in the story. They are part of history's most defining moment, yet they don't see it. They see only a man to be humiliated, not the savior of the world. Episode 1 emphasizes this blindness because it's not just about them, it's a mirror for us. How often does truth stand right in front of us while we're too distracted to recognize it? At the heart of this section lies Pilate's crumbling. His indecision, his fear of the crowd, his desperate attempt to avoid blame. It all collapses into one final act of cowardice. He hands Jesus over to be crucified. And though he tries to convince himself he's innocent, the truth is that his choice seals the fate of the innocent man before him. That haunting moment of washing his hands doesn't clean him, it condemns him. Episode 1 makes sure you feel the weight of that gesture. It's not just about Pilate. It's about the reality that when we stand by and let injustice pass, silence becomes guilt. From here, the preparation for the crucifixion begins. Jesus is stripped, beaten, and mocked again, and yet his calm never falters. The crown of thorns digs into his skin, blood runs down his face. And the soldiers laugh as though it's a joke. But in that brutal irony, something greater shines through. He is crowned, he is robed, he is declared king, not in the way Rome understood, but in the way heaven proclaimed. That twisted crown becomes the most powerful symbol in history, because it shows that his kingship isn't about thrones or armies. It's about sacrifice. What makes this section of the episode so unforgettable is how it forces you to confront the cost of what's happening. This isn't a story about a victim. It's a story about a choice to endure suffering, betrayal, and death for the sake of love. Every strike of the whip, every mocking laugh, every chant of crucify him becomes part of a larger picture. Episode 1 doesn't rush through these details. It slows down, letting you feel the heaviness of each moment until it almost feels unbearable. And yet, through that unbearable weight, there's a quiet sense of hope buried underneath. Because even though the world sees weakness, what's actually unfolding is strength beyond comprehension. By the close of this section, you realize episode 1 isn't just showing you history. It's making you live it. The betrayal, the trial, the sentencing, it all crashes together into one long, endless night. And the silence of Jesus, the calm in his eyes, becomes the center of it all. That silence says more than 1,000 speeches. It says that this is not the end, that this darkness is not the final word. And as the soldiers lead him forward, as the cross waits ahead, the tension leaves you holding your breath. Knowing the story is about to reach its breaking point, the road to Golgotha begins. And it's nothing like the paintings we've grown up seeing. Episode 1 makes sure of that. It doesn't soften the edges, it doesn't blur out the brutality. Jesus is forced to carry the heavy wooden cross through the crowded streets of Jerusalem, every step echoing with pain. The weight digs into his torn shoulders, the blood mixes with sweat, and the jeers of the crowd ring louder than any comfort. What strikes you hardest in this moment isn't just the physical suffering. Though that alone is unbearable, it's the loneliness of it. Surrounded by people, yet abandoned by those who knew him best. That piercing silence from the disciples still hangs in the air as he stumbles forward. The crowd is split into two kinds of people, those who mock and spit, and those who mourn in silence. Some call him a fraud, shouting that this is what happens when you challenge Rome. Others whisper through tears, unable to understand why the man who healed the blind, who fed thousands, who raised the dead, is now being led to his own death. That clash of voices makes the scene feel heavy with chaos. And at the center of it all, Jesus doesn't speak. He just carries, step after agonizing step, as if his silence itself is a message too deep for words. One of the most haunting parts of this section is Simon of Cyrene being pulled from the crowd. At first, he's reluctant, even resistant. Why should he bear the burden of a man condemned? But when the soldiers force him to pick up the cross, something shifts. As he walks beside Jesus, the weight he carries isn't just wood. It's the realization that this moment is bigger than humiliation or punishment. Simon's reluctant step becomes a picture of what it means to follow, to share in suffering even when you don't understand it. And in that brief connection, Jesus shows again what he's always done, turning outsiders into witnesses, strangers into participants in the divine story. Mary, his mother, watches from the side, and that sight tears you apart. Episode 1 lingers on her anguish, because there's no pain more unbearable than a mother watching her child suffer. Every step he takes must feel like a dagger through her heart, yet she doesn't turn away. That silent presence is one of the most powerful testimonies in the episode. She can't save him, but she can stay with him. And sometimes staying is the greatest act of love. Mary Magdalene, too, remains close, her face marked with grief but also with defiance, as if she refuses to let the world strip her of hope. Together, they embody what faith looks like in the darkest hours, not answers, not solutions, just presence and love that refuses to run. The soldiers mock him with more intensity now, pressing the crown of thorns deeper, shoving him to the ground, taunting him as king of the Jews. To them, it's just another criminal's humiliation, a performance of power for the crowd. But the episode layers the moment with irony so thick it leaves you shaking. Because what they declare in mockery is the deepest truth of all. He is the king, not just of the Jews, but of every heart, every nation, every soul. Their insults become prophecy, their cruelty becomes the very declaration of his eternal reign. That duality, brutality on the surface, glory underneath, is what makes this episode so haunting. As the climb continues, Jesus stumbles, collapsing under the weight of the cross. The soldiers grow impatient, the crowd presses closer, and for a moment it looks like he might not make it. But then he rises again, broken but unyielding. That rise isn't just about physical endurance, it's a declaration in itself. No matter how heavy the weight, no matter how cruel the suffering, he refuses to give up. And that persistence, that unshaken resolve, radiates through the screen. You can almost feel the message behind every shaky step. This isn't just endurance, it's purpose. By the time Golgotha comes into view, the atmosphere shifts. The mocking quiets down, the chaos dims, and a strange heaviness settles. Everyone knows what's about to happen. Crucifixion wasn't new, the people of Jerusalem had seen it before. But this one feels different. There's a tension in the air, a weight pressing on everyone's chest. Like the world itself is bracing for something it can't explain. And that's exactly what episode 1 captures. It slows the moment, letting you sit in the eerie stillness before the storm. As the soldiers prepare the site, the wood laid out, the nails ready, the dread becomes suffocating. And yet, Jesus doesn't resist. He doesn't plead. He doesn't curse. He simply lays himself down, as if surrendering is part of the plan. That silence screams louder than anything else. Because while Rome believes they're in control, while the Sanhedrin believes they've won, the truth is something entirely different. This isn't defeat, it's choice. A choice to lay down his life when he could have walked away. That's the twist episode 1 makes sure you don't miss. By the end of this section, as the hammer is raised and the nails gleam in the light, you're left sitting on the edge of your seat, breath caught in your throat. The world is about to change forever, and it's happening not with an army, not with a sword, but with a sacrifice that defies everything we thought we knew about power. Episode 1 doesn't let you escape the weight of that realization. It drags you into it, forces you to feel it, until you can't help but wonder if this is just the beginning of Season 6. How much heavier is it about to get? The hammer falls, and the sound echoes like thunder. Episode 1 doesn't rush past it, it makes you sit with the sharp crack of iron meeting flesh, the wince of pain that shoots through the body of Jesus, and the eerie silence that follows each strike. Every nail driven in feels like the world itself breaking apart. The soldiers work quickly, almost mechanically, as if they've done this 100 times before. But this time is different. This time, heaven and earth are both watching. With every hit, you feel the unbearable collision of brutality and destiny. And though the pain is unimaginable, Jesus endures it without resistance, without curses, without rage. That quiet submission transforms the scene from cruelty into something holy. The cross is lifted, and the image that has haunted humanity for centuries finally comes into full view. Jesus hangs between heaven and earth, bloodied, mocked, but radiant in a way that can't be explained. The crowd jeers, some laughing, others crying, and still others standing frozen, unable to turn away. The irony of the moment hangs thick, the King of the Jews nailed to wood, crowned in thorns, arms stretched wide. What the world calls humiliation is actually the greatest act of love ever displayed. Episode 1 captures that reversal in a way that makes your chest tighten. Because deep down, you know this isn't just suffering. It's salvation unfolding right before your eyes. The dialogue at the cross is what cuts the deepest. The soldiers and onlookers shout insults, daring him to come down, daring him to prove who he is. But instead of defending himself, Jesus uses what little breath he has to pray, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That line hits like a dagger. In the face of cruelty, betrayal, and pain beyond measure, his response is forgiveness. And not forgiveness after the fact, but forgiveness in the very moment of suffering. That's the kind of love no one could have expected. The kind that flips the entire story upside down. Two criminals hang beside him, one joining the mockery, the other pleading for mercy. And it's here, even nailed to a cross, that Jesus does what he's always done: he saves. He promises paradise to the repentant thief, showing that no moment is too late, no sin too deep, no darkness too overwhelming for his grace. Episode 1 frames this conversation with piercing focus because it isn't just about the thief. It's about every single person watching, every single heart hearing the story. The message is clear, even in the last breath, redemption is possible. Meanwhile, at the foot of the cross, Mary stands shattered. The pain on her face mirrors the agony of her son, but her eyes don't look away. John, the only disciple who stayed, stands beside her, and Jesus uses one of his last breaths to entrust them to each other. That small act, in the middle of cosmic suffering, shows that his love wasn't just for the world. It was deeply personal too. Episode 1 doesn't let you miss that detail. It's as if the writers wanted to remind us that even in his dying, Jesus was still giving, still loving, still making sure no one was left alone. Then the sky begins to change. Darkness creeps in, unnatural and terrifying. The earth itself reacts to the weight of what's happening, as though creation knows something humanity cannot yet grasp. The crowd shifts uneasily, fear mixing with curiosity, while the soldiers glance at each other with growing unease. And through it all, Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That raw cry of abandonment shatters the air. For the first time, you glimpse the depth of his suffering, not just in body, but in soul. Episode 1 doesn't shy away from that moment, it plunges you into it, forcing you to wrestle with the reality of a savior who felt the full weight of human despair. Finally, with one last breath, he declares, "It is finished," and in that instant, the earth shakes, rocks split, and the curtain in the temple tears from top to bottom. The episode leaves you stunned because those words don't sound like defeat. They sound like completion. A mission fulfilled, a promise sealed, a victory hidden inside the horror of death. As his head falls and the screen lingers in silence, you're left grappling with the overwhelming weight of what just happened. Episode 1 doesn't end with closure, it ends with shockwaves. The soldiers stand in awe, one even declaring, "Truly this was the Son of God." The disciples remain in hiding, the women weep, and the world itself seems broken. But underneath all that grief, a whisper of hope lingers. Because if he chose this willingly, if he bore the suffering with purpose, then the story can't end here. Episode 1 sets the stage for something bigger. Something that will shake not just Jerusalem but the entire world. And that's the power of The Chosen Season 6 Episode 1. It's not just another chapter. It's the breaking point. The darkest hour before the dawn. Every moment drags you into the weight of the crucifixion, not as a distant story, but as a living reality. It leaves you breathless, haunted, and deeply unsettled because you know this isn't the end. This is the beginning of the greatest twist in history. And if this is just the first episode of the season, then what comes next is going to leave us absolutely speechless.